Anyone who's ever done anything worth doing has dreamed big, failed mightily, and mostly started from humble beginnings. This is a podcast about such people. The most fascinating podcast in the world is fascinating because of the stories of the human beings. Hello, everybody. It's Pat DiCerbo, the most fascinating podcast in the world, which has nothing to do with me and everything to do with the people that agree to talk with me. Today, I have a fascinating person. His name is Hugh Rice, and Hugh and I have known one another from afar for many years, but more recently have caught up during various phone calls. He is very much engaged in the construction industry and had a robust career. And I was just saying, men like him are in short supply because he spent 53 years and 10 months so far with the same company, FMI, otherwise known as Fales Management Institute. Hugh is an electrical engineer with a degree from Georgia Tech, which I personally feel is, if not the best, one of the best engineering schools in the world, and also has an MBA from North Carolina at UNC at Chapel Hill. And he said that the undergrad was super challenging and the graduate school, by contrast, was not nearly as hard, which I thought was amusing. But welcome, Hugh. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Pat. I appreciate it very much.
My pleasure. I know we talked before, but can you remind me where you grew up?
Yes, I was born and raised in a little town in North Alabama, Florence, Alabama, which is in the Muscle Shoals area. My dad was a farmer. His dad was a farmer, and his dad was a farmer. So I grew up in the country and thought I was going to be a farmer someday, but it didn't quite work out. And but it was a nice place to grow up, for sure.
At what point did you decide that you were not going to be a farmer?
Actually, my father made that decision for me. I remember it well. I was probably 13 or 14 years old, and he came and sat down on the edge of the bed and told me that I couldn't be a farmer. And I said, gee whiz, how come? And he said, well, there's 5 kids in the family and 1 piece of land. And if you divide the land up 5 ways, you can't make a living on 1/5 of it. So go do something else. And if you want to be a farmer someday, you'll figure out how to do it. And so I said, okay, and went off in a different direction.
Did any of your siblings become farmers?
Actually, my younger brother, who is probably 15 or 16 years younger than me, came along. My dad was older and needed help and on the farm, and he let my brother help him. And my brother didn't go to college and stayed right there on the farm. And today he farms the family farm and pays all of his siblings rent, which we all appreciate. But in the grand scheme of things, I think it all worked out very well. He's a really good farmer, and my life took a lot of different turns.
For sure. So how did you decide on Georgia Tech?
Well, so farming was my first life plan. My second life plan was to go to the Air Force Academy. My dad was in the Army Air Corps in World War II. I had an uncle who was a pilot in World War II and sort of was an advocate for the Air Force Academy. And so I said, well, I'll do that. I'll go and go to the Air Force Academy and stay in the military 20 years and get my PhD while I'm in and come out in 20 years and be a college professor. So that was my second life plan. So I got an appointment from my congressperson in Alabama and went to Maxwell Air Force Base to take the physical exam and passed all that except all the push-ups and pull-ups I could do, but I had a bad ear. And in 1964, to go to the Air Force Academy, you had to be a perfect physical specimen, and I couldn't get in. So then I said, well, gee, what am I going to do? So I said, well, I'll try to be an engineer, and I wanted to be a good one. My father was an Auburn graduate, in agriculture, actually. And he wanted me to go to Auburn. And I said, well, I'm going to be an engineer. I'm going to be a really good one. So I went to Georgia Tech. He wasn't too happy about that, but that's how I got there.
No kidding. I thought Auburn was a great engineering school too, but
It is. And it would have been just fine. But for some reason, I got Georgia Tech in my brain. And that's where I ended up.
Well, you and I have discussed this, and every Georgia Tech engineering grad that I know says things like MIT was my second choice. So I always find it funny how passionate.
We think of MIT as the Georgia Tech of the North,
That's a great line. So what was it like when you first, you're leaving home for the first time and headed to Georgia Tech? What was it like when you first got there?
Well, I went to the high school I went to was pretty large. It was the only high school in town, but there were 1,200 kids there, so it was a pretty big place. So going away to college was not a big change for me. I'd never really spent any time in Atlanta, and it was a big city, which was very different than living in the country, of course. But what I discovered very quickly is even though, in my high school I was a good at academics and I was a good athlete. And what I discovered is that people that came to Georgia Tech were all really, really smart. And I was just one of many and probably wasn't as smart as I thought I was. So it was a bit of a challenge. I liked math and I liked science and I could do all that stuff. But at some point in my electrical engineering curriculum, it went from seeing electrons going through wires to being all math. And so it was really a mathematics degree. And I sort of lost interest in that, quite honestly.
Interesting.
And as I think I mentioned to you, I got to halfway through my junior year and said, maybe I shouldn't have done this. But at Georgia Tech, it was either engineering or math or science. And so I just put my head down and finished. And then decided that I would go to graduate school and get a business degree, which ended up being my calling. I really, really enjoyed that. And as you say, it was a lot easier than engineering, so it was a cakewalk. But I learned how to read the Wall Street Journal. That's what I did in 2 years at Carolina. Sort of understand what all that stuff meant.
That's a neat story. It reminds me of the management consultant, Jim Collins?
Of course.
So I heard him, he was on a podcast one time and he was being interviewed about Stanford, where he went to undergrad, I guess. And he said he was really good in math in high school and he got to Stanford and he thought, I'm born to do math. And he met some people that were so much smarter than him. He said, no, those people, they're born to do math. I'm smart, but they're born to do math.
Exactly. Yeah, it was a rude awakening, but I survived, and it's nice to have the degree. It's at least the electrical contractors that I did business with thought I was smart because I had a double E degree, but I never practiced, never was interested in practicing. I did have one job interview when I was at Tech. I went to Birmingham, Alabama, and interviewed with Alabama Power, which was part of the Southern Company. And I remember it very well. They took me around and showed me this big, huge, looked like a gymnasium with about, 250 drafting tables and guys in skinny black ties with pocket protectors sitting at them. And I said, this is not for me. I don't want to do this. So I just never pursued it.
So how did it come to pass that you met Professor Fales?
And oddly enough, at the University of North Carolina, there were FMI at that point in time was the Fales and Associates. It was Doc and about 4 or 5 people, and all of them, all but one of them, when I went to work there, were NC State graduates. one of the guys had gotten his MBA at UNC, and he interviewed on campus. So I interviewed this guy, Robert Boyette was his name, and he invited me over to the office in Raleigh, and met the people at the company and thought that was pretty interesting. I figured, this would be a fun way to spend a couple of years and travel around and see a lot of the country, and then I'll go get a real job. And 50 some odd years later, here I am.
I'm just getting warmed up.
Actually, to correct something that you said earlier, I actually went off of the FMI payroll officially in 2020.
Okay.
After 48 years, I figured I had enough paychecks. But I've kept an office and stayed associated with the firm and still refer business to them and help out where I can. So I'm still affiliated as a subcontractor, actually.
So for folks that may be listening that don't know what FMI is and what you spent your career doing, can you tell us a little bit about it?
I'll try to give you the short version. Dr. Fales was a college professor at NC State and started doing some consulting on the side. He taught a cost accounting course at NC State, and some of his former students went to work for construction companies and invited Doc to come do a speech at a convention or do an educational program or something like that for their company. And that led to him doing some consulting. And in the mid-1960s, he took a permanent leave of absence from the university and went in the consulting and training business full-time. All of his clients being construction companies. And then he began to hire some of his former students. And as I said, all of them but one was an NC State grad who had been Doc's former student. So when I went to work there in 1972, I think there were maybe 6 or 7 employees, something like that. It was like joining a fraternity. We're all in our 20s, and we went to the local pool hall and had lunch, and to the local bar and had a few beers after work, and it was great fun.
So what was the firm doing for these construction companies back then?
So it started out doing business-related consulting. Basically, he was taking an MBA curriculum, putting it into contractor language, and feeding it back to the industry, teaching contractors about finance, about marketing, about strategy, about organization, all business-related topics. Because most contractors, as you know, came up through the field or came up through the engineering world and did not have a lot of formal training in business. And so that was Doc's mission. Actually, his vision, stated vision when he started this firm, was to have a significant and positive impact on the overall profitability of the construction industry. Which was pretty ambitious for, one guy in North Carolina to say, I don't think I'm going to do that. And we still got some work to do, but after, he was started in 65, so however many years that is, the company certainly has had an impact, and it's still driven by Doc's original vision. And Doc was a gifted public speaker. He was spellbinding, and he was really good at doing, speeches for conventions, and then we did a lot of seminars. When I started there, the seminar business was more than half of the business of the company. We did the first seminars that most of the large AGC chapters ever did. And that's how the business really grew, was through doing training programs. And then people that went to the training programs would hire us to do consulting work in the business arena. And it sort of grew from there.
It's just my little story for AGC in New York at one time, and I may have told you this, but I had met Landon Funston a couple times and heard him speak at other groups. And there was a succession planning mandate, and I offered to moderate the panel, but I felt like in addition to, I had 2 contractors, Tom Barr from Bar and Bar, and I think the other one was like maybe John Peckham or somebody. And Landon Funston agreed to be on the panel as well. And it was a really nice interaction between sort of the academic, if you will, or the professional, and the people that had actually been through it.
Right.
And he did a great job. And I can see why you would get a lot more business out of that, because he could easily demonstrate his capabilities. He had very strong opinions.
Well, Doc and his original guys that we had probably 7 or 8 people that could have done Jay Leno's monologue. They were entertaining. They were great public speakers. They were funny. And Doc's strategy, he always said that the mind can only endure, the mind can only absorb what the butt can endure. So you have to make this entertaining. You have to get people's attention. You have to tell stories. You can't just lecture to people. And we really were in the educational entertainment business, and it worked very, very well.
That's a great lesson. I feel like so much of life is form over substance. Obviously, you have to have substance in the end, but entertaining people is critical to get their attention, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, it doesn't have to be smart. You got to be able to communicate. You got to be able to connect with people. They got to trust you. You got to be able to take complicated subjects and make them simple. Otherwise, your brain power is wasted.
So you start with this company, and would it be fair to say management consulting? Is that what you were doing?
That's exactly right. In Raleigh, in 1972, which sounds like a lot of years ago, because it was. and so what happened to me, it's interesting. Life is full of serendipity, and things happen to you that weren't planned. And one of the things that wasn't planned is that I got on a project with one of my senior colleagues at the time to work on succession planning and ownership transition planning for a large, heavy civil firm in Charlotte. And I never had a tax course. I had one accounting course in my entire life, and I was a marketing major in graduate school. And so I went with Jerry, and we went down to Charlotte and sort of did this project. And I got very interested in the whole idea of how do we help these companies transition these businesses from one generation to the next, or from the employer to the employees, or help the business survive in that transition process. And that was the beginnings of the idea of trying to do that kind of work. Dr. Fales had always done speeches on that subject, and we've done seminars on ownership transition planning and succession planning since the late 1960s, even before I started, and still do those seminars today. It's a permanent need that never goes away in the marketplace. Companies start, they grow, they become successful, and then something has to happen to them when the founders go away, or the company has to change ownership or change leadership. And so it's a never-ending supply of consulting opportunities. And I started doing that and really, really enjoyed it. And then in the late 1970s, we had a couple of clients who said, well, I don't have any kids. My employees are poor. They can't afford to buy me out, but I want to get out, and I want to get out now, and I want to get all my money out. I want to sell this company to somebody. And, that really had never happened. We didn't know any clients who'd made acquisitions or ever sold their companies before. Been very, very few examples of that in the industry. And so I said, gee whiz, why don't we try doing a seminar called Mergers and Acquisitions in Construction, which we did, I think, in 1979 in Chicago, and 50 people showed up. And we said, wow, maybe there's a business here. That's how we got into the acquisition business, which is how I spent most of my career from on a consulting basis, is helping people buy and sell construction companies, which has now grown to be a huge part of our company and a very successful part. But it was that third leg of the stool. You can give it to the kids, you can sell it to the employees, or you can sell it to a third party. And that was never an option, really, until probably the mid to early 80s when there started to be activity out there.
And how is it that you were able to get these deals financed? Like they had never been able to, nobody could sell their company in the old days, if you will. And how was it that I feel like you changed an industry, really.
Well, it's very interesting because the way the deals always got done, this is before private equity and before third party, investment in the construction world. Anybody that would buy a contractor was another contractor. And so these construction companies, when they made acquisitions, they were making the acquisitions out of their working capital. They weren't borrowing the money usually. Sometimes they did, but usually they had the capital. So it was large firms buying smaller firms. And then in the middle 80s, the international guys started coming to the U.S., especially in the aggregate asphalt ready mix business. And companies started coming from around the world, from Europe, from Australia, all over the place. And we made a really good living helping those guys make acquisitions and form joint ventures in the U.S. It was a big, it continues to be a big part of our business, but it was in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. That was a big chunk of the deals that we did had international buyers. And they were large public companies and they had capital to spend. They weren't all the market, of course, but it became socially acceptable to buy a company because before that, if you wanted to open an office, you wanted to move to, do business in Omaha, you'd go bid work in Omaha until you made a mistake and got a job. And then you'd use that as a base of operations to grow a branch. And people created offices that way instead of buying companies. And today, it's done the other way around.
So all the M&A activity that we're seeing and private equity money, and I feel like a lot of it's not well acquainted with the industry, the people that are throwing money at it. I feel like it's got to dry up at some point. What do you see happening going forward?
No, it's very fascinating. It all started in the late 1990s and early 2000s during the roll-up era. They call them roll-ups. Now they call them consolidations. And a roll-up was some guy with maybe a company that was started, from scratch and had a bunch of cash, a public company, and they wanted to consolidate an industry. And they went out and bought a whole bunch of mechanical contractors or a whole bunch of electrical contractors or insulation contractors and created a big business just through buying a lot of small companies. And many of those were not successful. There's still a few around, Quanta being a really big one down in Texas, which was a roll-up during that era. In the transmission distribution business, Comfort Systems in the mechanical world is still around from that era, but most of the ones that were done failed because they were over leveraged. And no, the people that were buying these companies didn't have any idea what the construction industry was all about. They were paying too high prices in many cases, creating too much leverage, and didn't understand that when the market died or went down or we had a recession, contractors' businesses would fall in half and their profits may go away and they couldn't service the debt. So it was a tough time. As time has gone on, the private equity guys have gotten more sophisticated. They're still doing these kind of transactions, but there's some very large people in the private equity world that have made a lot of acquisitions in construction. I don't see it stopping. There are certain kinds of construction companies that don't lend themselves to private equity, but some of the specialty subs and sort of the niche firms are where the action is. You don't find many building contractors being acquired by private equity because the margins are too skinny. They don't fit the model, but there's still a huge amount of activity out there.
So would that be the trade contractors primarily, the big subs, or the heavy highway, or both?
It means the trade contractors. There's been a huge consolidation in the aggregate ready-mix asphalt business by large firms like Vulcan and Martin Marietta and international firms, but also private equity guys who've started up companies and gone out and bought a bunch of these companies and turned them into a big company. So there's both sectors, a lot of international money and also a lot of private equity money, but not the building contractors so much, not the pure hard bid highway contractors so much, but the specialty trade contractors, electrical, mechanical, those kind of firms have been, there's a lot of money chasing that marketplace. The prices have gotten what I think are outlandish, but I'm old school on that front.
When you say price, you mean multiples as a function of earnings, or?
Exactly, 7, 8, 9, 10 times. We always thought a contractor was worth 4 to 5 times, and I still think that's what they're worth, but some people are paying a lot more money than that.
Well, I feel like there's so much speculation. Like I had a conversation with a person from Kiewit last year. We just happened to get to a cocktail party early, both of us. And I said, "You've been talking about retiring for, 3, 4, 5 years." And I asked him, "Are you thinking about it?" And he said, "I've been waiting my whole career for a time like this." He's like, "I can't retire. There's just too much opportunity." And I thought, there's a lot. I think there's so much work coming out. Where do you see the next 5 or 10 years? How do you feel about the industry?
Well, I'll tell you what's going on right now as we sit here is unbelievable to me. There are multiple examples. One, of course, is the data center world, which is like nothing that's ever happened to the construction industry. The amount of work, the volume of work, the pricing is just mind-boggling to me. Companies that were, doing $500 million are now doing $5 billion. I mean, it's just unbelievable what's happened in the general contractor and the electrical world in particular, and the mechanical world. But the other side of it is we have a lot of money for the heavy civil world. There has been a lot of public money out there that's being used for infrastructure and rebuilding highways and airports and trains and all that sort of thing all over the country. And then there's the water business, which has got more money in it than has been in it in years and years and years. So there's certain sectors of the marketplace that are as good as they've ever been, and better in some cases than they've ever been. And then there's office buildings, which nobody's building hardly anywhere, for all the obvious reasons. But the industry's doing great. People are making money. The way we used to measure this is the surety industry. You look at the surety industry and say, are they making money or are they losing money? And when times are tough, all the way from the 60s through probably the early 2000s, the surety industry had lots of ups and downs. They'd have big write-offs. They'd have big companies go broke. We did a study one time back in 2008, I think it was, called "Why Large Contractors Fail." Why does a large, sophisticated, well-managed, well-financed construction company go out of business or get into financial difficulty? And it was a fascinating study, and we went and sort of made a list of all those companies that were big companies that didn't exist anymore, and why did they fail? And there was all kinds of reasons. It's an interesting read if you're ever interested in looking at it. But the surety industry figured out that providing too much credit to a company that didn't have the financial wherewithal or didn't have the expertise to be doing what they were doing was a mistake, and they got really smart. And they stopped extending credit to people that couldn't handle it for one reason or the other. And the losses in the surety industry have gone down dramatically. For the last 20 years, the surety industry has been a fantastic business. They make a lot of money. They're not having big hits. Every now and then there's one, but it's not like it was in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. The industry's gotten much more sophisticated. Smarter people, better educated people have learned how to manage these risk-oriented businesses much better than they ever did. So the companies are better managed, they're better financed. The banks and the bonding companies are much more careful about extending credit, and the industry has done incredibly well financially. because of
Mhm.
all that.
And one other sector that kind of popped into my head as you were rattling them off was the energy sector. You know, that right now, liquid natural gas plants getting put up in Louisiana and Texas and elsewhere,
Right, right,
billions and
right.
billions.
Well, the data center business is as you know, is a huge consumer of power, and they'd like to just you know plug it in and take it off the grid, but sometimes it's not available. That
Mm,
plant in Louisiana, which is a $10 billion data center, they're
mm,
building two dedicated gas-fired power plants just to supply that data center, and that's
mm,
the model everywhere now. Unless you get really lucky to find a place that has excess power on the grid, you've got to figure out where you're going to get the power, or you can't operate the data center.
mm,
And there's a lot of things going on there that are going to change that. I personally think, in spite of the current administration, that alternative energy, the solar, wind, geothermal, that's not going away. We're just in
mm,
a little bit of a blip here. The demand is huge, which can't be provided by those alternative energies, but they're not going away.
mm. So, can they compete with fossil fuels in, say, places like Texas and where you have wind and
Absolutely,
sun? Mhm,
absolutely, absolutely. It's solar got to be cheaper than gas and oil. It's certainly a
mm,
lot cheaper than coal, um,
mhm,
because the price of it kept going down and down and down, and so it can stand on its own. It
mm,
depends. The problem is the ability to have a base load of power,
mm,
um, which is where you can get with a peaker plant that's gas or coal fired or nuclear. The other
mhm,
thing that's a wild card out there is there's 10 to 15 companies that are out there developing these modular nuclear power plants that are
mm,
sort of small, and they cost 2 or 3 billion instead of 20 billion, and they're going to figure out how to make that work. Everybody says that by the early part of the 2030s, those things are going to start coming online, and when that happens, it's going to change the nature of the energy business.
mm. I have high hopes for the future.
Absolutely, absolutely. We can't provide the power that our country needs, and you know, without nuclear. Nuclear has just got to be part of the equation.
Mm. So, looking back on your career, like when you first started in the first 5 or 10 years, at first you said, I'll do this and then get a real job. At what
Right.
point did you decide, I really kind of like this and I'm going to hang in there? And
That's a
was there a
great
point?
question. I, I would have to say that I liked it immediately. I sort of
Mm,
liked the consultative, um, building a relationship, being a trusted advisor. I liked that role very much, and I found something I was good at, and and I enjoyed, and I got paid for. And I figured, I looked at going in business for myself, like everybody else does, and or going to do something else. But I kept getting opportunities at FMI and doing. In 1979, I moved to Denver to open an office out here, um, so I could have a management role and hire people and build a business, not just be a consultant and be a public speaker. So even though I only worked for one company my whole life, I had a myriad of different activities as I went through that process. I got to be a writer, I got to be a researcher, I got to be a public speaker, I got to do consulting, I got to be an investment banker and do deals, which I really liked. Um, and I got to manage part of the business and eventually the whole business. So it was a hell of a ride. It couldn't have gone any better if I'd have planned it myself.
well, in addition to all that, you have this collection of friends that you've helped over the years that is like, they'd be in the Hall of Fame. Like if they had, maybe, well, they do have certain construction halls of fame, but your friend list that has to be very rewarding to have the trust of those people, I would imagine.
Well, yeah, it's if you've been at it a long time, you make a lot of contacts. You get to know a lot of people. And I got to know it was my job.
Mm.
I belonged to all the bigger organizations, HEC and ABC, and all the subcontractor associations, and did a lot of speeches. Real active in the beavers and the moles. Um, so I was there and I was present a lot. So I got to know a lot of people, and I really liked the people. They're real human beings. They're not. They're not. What's the right word? They're not full of themselves generally. Um, they're real human beings, and I sort of was drawn to that, and I liked doing business with those folks. And I've got friends all over this country and other parts of the world because of having been in the business a long time. And my phone still rings, and not as much as it used to, but people call me I haven't talked to in 10 or 15 years, and I'm happy to talk to anybody. I'm happy to meet with anybody if they want to come to Denver, but I'm not going anywhere.
Those days are done.
We're done. I've got a lot of miles on United Airlines, and I don't need any more.
Mm-hmm. How many miles would you guess you've flown over the years?
Oh gosh, I have the dubious distinction on United, which I've flown mostly. I have 4.5 million actual seat miles, which gives
Wow.
me lifetime global services, which is nice. When you travel, they do take care of you. But I flew on Eastern a lot and Delta a lot, and I lived in Raleigh, and so I don't know, 7 or 8 million probably, but who's counting?
I was just curious. That's a big number.
It's a really big number. A really big number, especially when I did it the hard way in the lower 48 mostly. It was, I wasn't fly. I did a lot of overseas stuff, but I didn't fly that much. It was mainly just around the U.S.
Mm-hmm. How did you decide on Denver in '79 when you?
Actually, that's one of those serendipitous things. I was sitting in my cubicle in Raleigh, probably in the mid 1970s, and my phone rang, and it was a guy from Fort Collins calling into FMI saying, "Hey, we need somebody to come help us with our succession plan." And I'd never been to Colorado before. Um, I've been to west of the Mississippi, but not very much. And so I got on a plane and flew to Denver and drove to Fort Collins, and it was a highway contractor up there, and I really liked the people. And I got here and I said I was traveling to places like Newark, New Jersey, and Erie, Pennsylvania, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and places that were sort of not so nice in the wintertime. And I came to Colorado and I said, wow, this place is beautiful, the weather's nice, and the people are nice. And so I made a point of trying to get more business out here. So when I moved out here in 1979, I was spending 2 weeks a month traveling out here. So it was a natural thing to do. I had a lot of friends already and customers already, and it was a good place for us to serve the western part of the United States. So it was a complete accident, like a lot of things that happen to you in life.
But it sounds like you made the most of it.
Well, it worked out extremely well. Yeah. And so this office today, I don't know how many people are in this office or assigned to this office, but it's probably 60 or 70. And it's grown a lot. I mean, FMI, when I started, as I said, was like, 6 or 7 people, and today there's 200 plus. And they're doing fantastically well. One of the great things about that I learned in my career was that running a business and having a great business to be successful, that's wonderful. But the real test is, can that business make a transition to the next generation and still be successful? And we have done that. All the original guys from FMI are all retired. Most of us still alive, and we still see each other and reminisce, and we're all very, very proud of the fact that this company has continued to grow, continue to be successful, continue to take care of their clients, and live the values that Doc really laid out for us. And it's a very satisfying thing.
I imagine so. So how do you spend your time these days? if you're not working a lot?
Well, that's also interesting. Is when COVID started, I was on 5 corporate boards, which is how I spent the last 10 years. Really, as being a board member with the people I've done business with, and I really liked that role. I like being on boards, and I've got a broad background, and so I can add value in a lot of different ways. And then COVID hit, and it worked out great because I didn't have to go anywhere. I could do all my board meetings on Zoom and not have to spend, 2 days getting to and from a meeting. But then when COVID was over, everybody said, well, let's get back together and have our meetings in person. And I said, no, I really don't want to do that. And so today I'm down to 1 corporate board. But I've gotten real involved locally in some small business things I've invested in, as well as not-for-profit things. And, my wife and I stay really, really busy locally. We have 10 grandchildren and 6 children between us. 5 of the kids and 7 of the grandkids live within rock throwing distance. So we have a lot of family togetherness time, in addition to social activities and business activities and not-for-profit activities. And so I'm still waiting for the day, Pat, when I can wake up in the morning, look at my calendar, and there's nothing on it. I'm still looking for that.
For 10 grandkids, you must have tons of stuff to go to.
We do. We stay busy. In fact, Mary and I travel because we have to take a break and go on vacation.
That's funny.
Oh,
Are
good.
they into sports, or what do they like to do?
Well, they're from 1 year to 18 years, so a little bit of everything.
So is there anything, like someone asked me this question last week, and I'm a little younger than you, but it was funny. He said, "What's on your bucket list?" And I said, I don't know. I think I'm happy. There's nothing I want to do that I haven't done. Like, is there something that you feel like you want to do that you haven't yet done?
I think the short answer is, well, sure. There's always things that are new and different, but I don't have a list of things that I got to go to these 10 places before I die. I've been a hell of a lot of places. I've been to all 48 states, all 50 states multiple times, and probably 30 or 40 or foreign countries. And I've traveled a lot, and Mary and I have traveled an awful lot, and we still, we're still looking for things to do, and we have things scheduled out over the next 2 years that we're going to do. But I do enjoy travel, but I like being home too. I like being involved locally because I have a lot of sort of passions about charitable organizations, but I don't just want to give them money. I want to be involved. I want to see where the money's going, and I want to participate and have some impact on how the money gets spent. And so that ends up being very rewarding and very satisfying. And I'd like to do more of that as long as I stay healthy. And, this is going to sound a little bit morbid to you, but I say this often. If I drop dead tomorrow, I have no regrets. I've lived a charmed life, and life has gone my way, and I don't have any regrets. I don't have anything I have to do before that happens. My goal, and I told my kids this, my goal is when something happens to me, I want nobody to notice. I want it to be so seamless that nobody has to say, why didn't that SOB make his affairs in better order? And I said, I want to make sure that everything is smooth and life goes on.
Old habits die hard, I guess. You're used to making things convenient for other people.
Exactly. Yeah, it's been a hell of a ride. And what's interesting is that there's about 7 or 8 guys like me that spent their whole careers at FMI. Started in their 20s. We all started about the same time. I was the youngest one of that group. But, we spent our whole careers there, and it's a very unusual circumstance for that to happen. I mean, how many
people... You're in
touch
with them?
Oh yeah, we try to travel together every few years, and we keep saying every time we do it, we need to do it more often because we're not going to all be around forever. So let's take
Hmm.
advantage of it.
No doubt. So if you like I said at the beginning, people like you are in short supply. I got the years wrong, but you spent a lot of time at one company. What would you say to a young person today coming out of college as it relates to that? Because I personally agree with you. I feel like there's all these subtle benefits you get from loyalty and longevity in a business, as long as it's a vibrant, growing
Sure,
business.
sure, sure.
But I
Yeah,
prejudiced it. I'm interested in your opinion.
yeah. Well, what I tell people that I always did tell people that would come to work at FMI, I said, look, this is not a sprint. This is a marathon. And, your business won't develop overnight. And if you send out, 50 marketing letters, nobody's going to respond to them. You've got to think of it as a way of building relationships over time. And I think this applies to any business, certainly yours and mine. It's a relationship driven. And you got to build relationships, and you got to be trustworthy, and you got to do what you say you're going to do. Um, and over time, those relationships will come back and favor you. And but if you think you're going to come here and work for 2 years and then go somewhere else and take advantage of that, it's not that easy. Now, my experience is unique. I know that. There's a lot of most people have multiple jobs during their lifetime. Um, what I said when I got out of graduate school, my goal was to have a series of careers. I wanted to spend 10 years and do a variety of things. And that didn't quite work out, but I did a variety of things, but with the same company.
Right.
So I got the variety, but I didn't have to leave the organization. The thing that I think that people miss when they don't stay long enough to really get comfortable, get to be known, get to be in a position where you can make an impact. Um, it didn't start paying off for 5 or 7 or 8 or 10 years for me. Um, we used to laugh about this that how do people at FMI get business? We we never had a marketing department. We just all were out there in the marketplace getting to know people. Um, but our job was to take advantage of opportunities. And I was a terrible salesperson. If you sent me out to knock on doors and try to sell consulting to somebody, I'd never sell anything to anybody. My goal was to make sure that we built our reputation. We always did great work so that somebody would say, gee whiz, that was better than I thought it was going to be. Keep our name in front of people and make the telephone ring. So I wanted somebody to call me or call us and say, hey, I need you guys. Instead of us having to go out and beat them over the head and say, we want to sell some consulting to you. And that worked incredibly well, but it doesn't work overnight.
Mm-mm.
It takes a lifetime to create those kind of relationships and that kind of reputation.
Yeah, I'm not like allowed to talk about my career much on this podcast, but I will say that I had breakfast with a guy today who's known me for 30 years, and he said, "I can't believe you have the same team 30 years later. It's just amazing." And it's super reassuring for people when they call. Same people. They know
Of
your
course,
circumstances and
of course,
but
of
you
course.
like you said something else too before. I forget how you put it, but it reminded me of a story. There's this company that was founded here in the Northeast called Grando Gloves, and it was the Zuckerwar family. And the guy I was talking to, his name was Eric. He was the cousin. Like his mother was a Zuckerwar, but he had a different last name. And that morning that I was meeting with him, an employee had come to Eric earlier and said he wanted a raise. And Eric said, I have no problem paying you more money, but I need more value. In other words, if I'm going to pay you more money and for it to make sense for this company, I need you to create more revenue for this company so I can pay you more. And I just feel like so few people are oriented today that I'm running it, they're there. It's not that there's none of them, but I feel like you innovated within the confines of this company in such a way that it was almost like you created new business units and drove revenue. And of course, you didn't have to wonder that if you were going to get paid more. You were just
No.
generating more revenue for the company, and everyone was happy to
So,
pay you.
so there's another aspect of this which is important, which is one of the keys, I think, to FMI's continued success is early in my career, I said, look, we need to think about making sure that every interaction we have with a client is better than they thought it was going to be.
Mm.
And that we want to make sure we need to have a money back guarantee, which for a consulting firm was probably never existed.
Terrifying.
And so if you read our terms and conditions today, it says the same thing it said 40 years ago, which was if you're ever unhappy, if you don't think you got what you're paid for, we'll refund your money. No questions asked. We've never been in a lawsuit with a client ever to collect money, ever. And if somebody said, I think that was worth 50 cents on the dollar, we'll say, pay us 50 cents and we're even. Now, the reason that's important is that means that every client gets to set the price ultimately of the service that they buy. So it makes selling things much easier. If you say to somebody, this is going to cost you $50,000, and they're going to say, that sounds like a lot of money. And you say, well, look, when we're done, pay us what you think it was worth. No questions asked. We've had people pay us more than we billed. We've had very few people in our career that said, well, it was only worth half of that. It happened every now and then. We give people money back. It happens, once or twice every 2 or 3 years, probably now. I don't know. But that really changed the dynamic of how we thought about our business. So we're in the business to provide value and to have a satisfied client. And if we do those two things, life takes care of itself.
Amen. I started to ask you how you saw the future in construction. I think you're bullish on America, bullish on construction.
Absolutely. I'm actually speaking of work. One of my colleagues here runs a peer group of large electrical contractors, and they're going to be here sometime in the next month or so. And they asked me to come and spend an hour with them and just talk about, what we're talking about. Where's the world going, and what things should they be concerned about? And one of my speeches historically was always, what drives the need for construction? Construction demand is driven by something besides somebody going out and saying, I want to go sell a building to somebody. What are those underlying things that create the need for construction? And it's things like technology change, it's things like demographics and movement of people, population growth, it's social things, it's government policy, it's, things that are going on. It's the technology change is the obvious one because that's driven a huge amount of construction. Look at data centers. That's all about AI. The amount of construction that's going on today because of artificial intelligence is just mind-boggling. So you got to think about not what's happening in the construction marketplace. You got to think about what's going on in the world around you, in the economy, in society in general, that's going to create the need for different kinds of construction. And if you think about it that way, it's a lot easier to figure out, gee whiz, this might be a good marketplace, or this is going to be a crappy marketplace. If you're building schools in Pittsburgh and the number of school-age kids in Pittsburgh is going to go down over the next 10 years, that's a crappy business. So you got to think about, not is the school market good, but what about how many kids are going to go into school? It's that kind of thought process to think about when you think about where the opportunity is going to be. And if somebody had said to me 5 years ago, well, what about data centers? Me and nobody else would have said, that's going to be the best market ever. It's all driven by things that nobody anticipated.
Mm.
You can think of some things like water. Everybody has to have clean water. Everybody has to have water to drink. There has to be water for transportation. And so things related to water is a good market. The money's been appropriated. We know it's going to be there. There's going to be a demand for water, not just because of the need for water, but because the government is mandating certain things in terms of clean water. And that creates need for construction. So it's that kind of thought process that I think it really helps to go through from thinking about strategy is, where's the world going and where's that probably going to create some activity?
Mm. So one or two last questions. Where do you see the workforce going? Like I'm hearing things like we don't have enough engineers and or technicians of all kinds. Do we have enough people to do all this work?
I think it's a huge problem.
Mm.
You know, for this, there's a whole bunch of things going on. Immigration has fueled the labor side of the construction industry for the last 30 or 40 years, and that has stopped. And in fact, it's reversed itself. So the question is, where is the labor, the lower skilled labor, going to come from to do the work that has to be done to get things built? That's a huge unknown at this point.
Mm-hmm.
The other side of it is the construction labor force is 95% male. So we've skipped out on the whole female sector, which happens to be the smart sector of the population. And why can we not get more women involved in the construction trades? And everybody's worked on it and everybody's tried to do things. There's a lot of work going on, but we have to tap into that untapped resource. We can't do it with, a bunch of old white guys. It's not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
I think immigration is the best thing that's ever happened to this country. I'm really sorry that the way this has been evolved in the last year in our country, and our population is going to decline because the number of people born in the United States is below replacement. If we don't have immigration, the population is going to go down, and that's not good for the economy at all, much less the workforce. It's a huge problem that there's a lot of people talking about, a lot of people thinking about. We need immigrants. We need smart immigrants. We need educated immigrants, and we need people that can do, common labor. And I just have to believe that sooner or later that's going to reverse itself. But who knows is the answer.
Mm.
It's a big challenge, clearly.
No doubt. Is there anything you might like to say or ask me that we haven't talked about today? I feel like we covered a lot of ground, but
we have covered a lot of ground. I like talking about this industry. It's what I've done for a living my whole adult life. We've covered a lot of things. And we could dream up some more to talk about, but I really appreciate you asking me to do this, and it's always fun to talk about yourself. You know how that goes. And one of the other things I've learned in life, though, is my father told me this when I was younger, and he said, you never learned anything talking, so you have to listen. And as a consultant, as you know, when you're trying to understand somebody's business or understand their needs, you ask questions and you listen to the answers, and then you perhaps you can help deal with whatever the issue is. And so I'm a professional question asker. You'll appreciate the fact that my wife and I will go out to a cocktail party and we'll meet a couple we hadn't met, and we'll have, a 20-minute conversation with them, and we'll know everything about them. They'll know nothing about us. We ask questions, and it's a fascinating phenomenon. And they think we're great because we ask them questions. But that whole phenomenon of asking questions and listening and trying to understand. I used to have owners of businesses who would look at me after I'd go interview 15 of their employees. I'd come back and say, well, here's kind of what I heard. And they said, how the hell did you learn all that? You just listen, people will tell complete strangers amazing things. All you
Mm-hmm.
got to do is ask questions and let people
Mm.
talk. And you've done a great job of that today.
Oh, thank you. It's a fun game, isn't it?
It is. It is. It is.
um, so I'm in the habit of asking people one last thing. It has to do with the hyphen. Do you know why the hyphen is the most important punctuation?
No idea.
It's between our date of birth and our date of death. And if you reflect back on your life, and there were people, your great, great, great grandchildren, 50 years or 100 years from now, who will never know you, what would you want them to know about you?
Oh, wow. Wow, wow, wow. Well, that's a great question. And it's really got nothing to do with what we've been talking about for the last hour. It's more about, you know, did you do the right thing? Did you treat people better than they thought they should be treated? It's how you treat other people, and about relationships that you built and how the impact you had on other people. Uh, that's really what it's all about. Lou Holtz just died, as you probably read,
Mm.
um, and he had a thing that he used to say, which I've, sort of tried to emulate, and it was three things. It was always do your best, um, always do the right thing, and always treat people the way uh, better than they want to be treated. And
Mm.
that's the way I kind of try to live my life, is doing the very best that I can, do the right thing, because you can't do the wrong thing the right way. You got to do the right thing, and
Mm.
that's a sensitive thing in this day and age. I think, is people don't think about that enough. Um, it's not about the outcome so much as it is about, did you do the right thing?
Mm.
So that's kind of the way I would see my legacy. And I'm also doing something that you might know about or not know about. Is there's a thing online you can do called Storyworth, and they give you a question every month or so, and you're supposed to write the answer to that. And it's basically writing your life story um, over a period of several months.
Mm.
It's like a memoir, but you do it painlessly. And
Mm.
I'm in the process of doing that, which I'm looking forward to, which is going to be something that I think my grandkids and great grandkids will get to know me a little bit by those words having come out of my mouth directly.
Mm.
That's going to be documented for them.
That's really neat. I had not heard about that.
It's very cool.
Thank you. So, in the universe that I travel in, you are universally respected and have been a leader for my entire career, really. I mean, I've been in the service of folks in design and construction since 91. My father-in-law was in heavy construction. My wife's a civil engineer, my brother-in-law, etc. And, I don't know you well, but I know your reputation. And it seems to me that you have a lot of people that really admire you and feel like you did treat them well over the years. And sounds to me like mission accomplished. It's really nice.
Well, look, I feel good about it, and having respect. It sounds a little egotistic, but it's a function of how you treated people and
Mm.
what you did, and how you conducted yourself. And so, having FMI be respected as a firm is to be the ball game. If you're not respected, if your clients don't always say good things about you, and that it's true of all of us as individuals, but it applies to our firm, that's really so critical. And I tried to do everything I could in my career to make sure that was the case, and I think it's being carried forward, and I'm proud of that.
Amen. Well, I'm delighted to have spent the time with you. Look forward to seeing you again. I am in Denver occasionally, so hopefully we'll get together. And I would love
Please.
to introduce you to the women's Olympic and world team wrestling coach, Terry Steiner, if you don't already know him.
I don't.
He's a wonderful person. So I'm going to connect you by email if that's okay.
Please do. And if you're out here call me, please. This has been great. I really thank you for doing this.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Have a great day.
Okay,
Bye,
Pat.
Hugh.
Thanks much.
You were great. If you enjoy the most fascinating podcast in the world, please follow on Spotify, subscribe on YouTube, and follow on Apple Podcast.